Welcome back to WeRC. Today we have a Traxxas four-wheel drive VXL Slash that we need to replace the spur gear on. So we're going to show you the quick and easy way to do that. Keep in mind this is not an ultimate, so it does not have the low center of gravity chassis. This is the standard chassis. This is going to be the same thing that your Rustler 4x4 has as well. So let's get to it. Alright guys, we'll start with a 2mm, and we're going to just take the gear cover off. Just one screw that holds that in here in the center. Pull that out. You probably need a small straight screwdriver to just get under that cap and pop it loose in just a few spots. You can pull that out and set it aside. Next, we just have 4 screws, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom to take out. They are a 2.5mm. We'll take these top 2 out. And these 4 screws are all the same. So you don't need to worry too much about remembering which ones were in the top, which ones were in the bottom. Flip it over. Pull the bottom 2 out. And at this point, once you have these 4 screws out, you can take the back half of the truck, including the differential, completely off, separate from the chassis. So we'll flip it back over, pull this out, set that aside. Now when you look in here, you can see our spur gear, we see our slipper clutch. Now, a lot of times people will try and take this plastic cover off, take the grub screw out, but what I do is just pull this whole assembly straight out. Leave that set up just as is. And what I like to do is just take your nut that holds your spring and back this all the way out. And that'll give you enough play that you can pull the pin out of here and take the slipper clutch off this way. So that's why I say this is the fast method. This is a 5/16 on that nut. Now be careful when you do this, your clutch plates probably are going to come loose and fall out. Just make sure you don't lose them. This is about 7 turns is what it takes to back it all the way out. But just back it all the way out. And that's what will give you enough play to get the pin out. All right, so now we can compress this. That pin will come right out. And now we can actually pull all of this back off this direction. So there's our clutch. Our clutch plates are still right there. All right, then we have 3, again, 2.5 inch or 2.5mm, I should say, screws to pull out of there. And we can pull this right off. Again, you may need to use a straight screwdriver. We're not putting a lot of pressure here, just a little bit to pry this loose. Once that's loose, we can pop that off. And this is our old spur gear. You can see the teeth kind of got filed off by the pinion. So the replacement part is Traxxas 3956. This gives the stock gear 54 tooth. Just give you a comparison of what the new one looks like compared to the old one. So we see the difference in the teeth there and how worn down those are. So this side that has these little cups in it, that's the side that the screws go through. So we'll take our clutch assembly, set it back on here. Now, because this is metal, I do recommend taking a little bit of Loctite and putting it on the screws here before you tighten those down. You saw I was using a drill to take these screws out, but when I put them back in, I recommend that you just use your actual driver and do it by hand. We don't want to strip anything out. Again, 2.5 millimeter. Don't have to over tighten it. Loctite, just a little dab. And the third one. All right, and we're ready to put this back together. Make sure we have everything lined up. Take it, put it back on our shaft here. Make sure, by the way, that your bearing is still intact and in place there. It'll slide right into the new spur gear. All right, so now we're set to where we can drop that pin right back in. You may need to use a pair of needle nose pliers for this, but that's where the pin goes right there. Then we just slide this back out to engage it. And the last step then is just to retighten that nut. Now, of course, how tight you want to put this nut is dependent on if you have like a Rustler, for example, and you want it to do wheelies, you're going to want that to be pretty tight. It just depends on how much traction you want versus if you want it to just immediately pick up off the ground. I like to keep it pretty tight since this is a Slash. They don't really do wheelies too well anyhow, but they give you plenty of traction when you're taking off the gate. All right, so that's our assembly put back together. So now we just slide this back into the rear of the truck. Of course, we have to line it up with the center drive shaft, and we also have to line it up with the pinion. But it's not too difficult to do that. Just slowly rotate it around, and it'll engage right in there. All right. And we got to make sure our bearing gets set there. There it is. All right. And now we're ready to put the back end back on. Now the only thing with this, when we put the back end back on, you may have to roll the tires to get the differential to engage here. You also want to make sure that your bell housing tucks in properly on the bottom of the chassis. So we'll just mate this together. Let's take your thumb and push it right there. Make sure that's under there, and then you may just have to give it a little roll. We'll do it on the bench here. Just give it a little roll, and it'll push forward just like that. And it's engaged. All right, so now we just put our 4 screws back in, and we are almost done. 2 on the bottom. Again, these 4 screws are all the same. I'm not over tightening these with the drill. I am going to go back and just tighten them by hand here. This is the 2.5 millimeter. You don't want to strip those out into the chassis. Hit the top 2. Again, not over tightening those if you're using a drill. Finish them by hand. When I'm at this point, I just like to double check that the pinion and the spur gear are engaged properly. We can see that they are. It's not too tight. It's not too loose. It's in alignment with it, fairly well centered. The pinion's fairly well centered on the spur gear. But just a few things you want to double check. Everything looks good though. We'll put the cover back on and put our last 2mm screw in there, and we'll test it out. Alright guys, we should have showed you what it sounded like before we replaced that gear, but if you're watching this video, I'm sure you know what it sounded like, because yours is doing the same thing, grinding. The wheels basically don't spin. Always make sure your transmitter's turned on first. Turn on our receiver, and there you have it. Alright guys, so hopefully you found this video to be helpful. That's the fast and easy way to replace the Spur gear on your Traxxas Slash VXL 4x4. And that is how we RC.